"What do you mean, you would like to announce Omekagu as king?" One of the elders asked, appalled. "Abomination!" Another exclaimed. "This is my title, and I shall do with it as I want." The king insisted. "If your father had broken tradition, will you be king now?" Another elder asked. "My father kept tradition only because I was his favorite child. I won over my father and won over this position. Omekagu's brother has not earned my inheritance. You are blinded by love and bias." The first elder spoke, "And I refuse to be part of this madness. How can you even consider taking away that which belongs to another and giving to someone else, simply because you prefer that person?" The oldest elder said. "Are you acting out of justice and fairness? Like I said, it belongs to me, and I will give it to whoever I want to." As they spoke, the Dibia returned to the palace. "Igwe, I have returned with a warning from the gods," he said. "After disrespecting me this morning." The Igwe signaled for his guards to throw out the Dibia. But the Dibia hit his staff on the ground and they halted, afraid. "Before doing evil to a person," he said, "gather sand in your hands and lift it to the sun god 3 times, to let her know that what you are doing is just and you have no fault. Because if the person feels wronged and cries to the same god, she will still exact justice on you as she did to them." The Dibia turned and left once he had spoken. After hearing the Dibia words, the elders got up and left, advising the king to not upset their traditions because they exist for a reason. But the king would not listen. He loved Omekagu and he was going to give him the world. He sat on his throne and thought of what he could do to ensure that Omekagu got everything after his death. As Omekagu's brother walked down the forest, he could feel the terrain change from green to a mix of purple and red mist. "What brings you here, young king?" He looked around but could not see where the voice had come from. "I was told about a gift that the gods have for me," he answered. "You must be Omekagu's brother." The voice came again as a man came into view. He was more handsome than any living human he had ever seen, and his hair was as red and thick as cow's blood. "Who are you?" Omekagu's brother asked. "I cannot bear my name as the king has not borne his." The man replied, then continued. "I have a story to tell you, can I join you on your journey?" Omekagu's brother looked around. He was no longer on earth, but he did not see a need to feel afraid. "Yes, you may. Once upon a time, there was a young prince, the oldest of his father's children, and as the oldest of his father's king's children, he was destined to rule, so this made the prince arrogant. He never got punished for his sins and never got chastised, and with every passing day he felt more invincible than the last. One day, a new maid arrived in the palace. She was beautiful. The maid had lived a rough life before arriving at the palace. She was in love with her town's lyricist, and though they had had sex several times, he had refused to marry her. Then one day her village went to war with the next and lost. Her lover was beheaded and she was captured, raped and abused by many soldiers before finally being sold as a slave to the palace. The slavers mentioned to the king that she was not a virgin, but skipped one important piece of information. All the men who had raped her had been struck down by the god of lightning and thunder in their homes, their houses, properties, wives and children destroyed. For unknown reasons, even to the woman, for she was beloved by the gods. But because the gods are forbidden from interfering with human acts, they could only avenge her by punishing those who had desecrated the land. At the palace, she tried to keep her head down and avoid trouble where she could. Since had heard about the sort of man that the prince was, she also tried her best to avoid him. But the more she avoided him, the more the prince tried to get close to her. Finding it difficult to secure the maid's attention, the young prince requested that the king make her his personal slave, and of course, he got what he wanted. Yet the maid remained reserved and tried her best to avoid being alone with him. The prince, who had once thought of the maid's avoidance as endearing, was now becoming annoyed at it, so he demanded that she lay on his bed and serve him. But the maid refused. The prince became infuriated. She was not even a virgin, she had no chastity to protect, yet she refused him, the prince, the future king. She should have been honored by the attention he gave her, and he had even tried to be patient with her. She begged him not to. She told him that she had vowed to the gods that the next man she slept with would be her husband, but the prince's pride-filled wrath would not listen, so he forced himself on the maid. And once he was done, he threw her out of his room and fired her from the service of the palace. The earth goddess was infuriated and disgusted by this act and struck the prince with a fever. For weeks the prince remained bedridden, and soon it became obvious to everybody that he would die. As a last resort, the dibia was called, and through divination, he disclosed that the price had been caused by the earth goddess because he had committed an abomination against the land, and the only solution was to find the maid and make things right by her. So, a search was ordered, and the maid was found and returned to the palace. Everybody begged her to forgive the prince, but she refused, insisting that forgiveness was the only thing which belonged to her, and she would not give it away. The king offered to pay her a plot of land, but she refused. Infuriated by her insolence, the king ordered that she be flogged until she forgave the prince. After all, nothing of value was taken from her since she was not a virgin in the first place. So, the maid was flogged, but she refused to forgive him, and with each stroke of the cane, the prince's health became worse, until it seemed that he would die. The king became desperate. He begged her to forgive his son, and he threatened to kill her if his son died, but she stood her ground and now hated the king as well. Finally, the queen, who had been quiet through her turmoil, spoke. She asked the maid for her name, and the maid told her it was Ofonwa. Then she asked her what she wanted, and the girl told her that the prince would have to marry her to undo the shame he had brought upon her. The king was against it, but the queen agreed to the terms and convinced her husband to allow it for the sake of their dying son. Ofonwa was married to the dying prince, and immediately after the ceremony was over, the curse was lifted from the prince. On finding out what had happened to him, the prince vowed that he would never make Ofonwa queen, and he would never give her a child, but she was already pregnant. So, he hated her and sought to have her killed. But that night, the king was found dead in his sleep, with a marking on his back that suggested that he had been flogged. The dibia was called in, and once again, through divination, he revealed that the gods had taken justice on the king for his unfair treatment of Ofonwa, and warned that anybody with ill intention towards her should repent, as even the king was not spared for treating her poorly. With the warning, the only thing that the prince could do was hate Ofonwa, regret raping her and hate her offspring, and avoid her. The handsome man beamed. "We are here." He gestures at the altar. There was a wooden flute on it. "Your gift from the gods." "What happened to Ofonwa, her child, and the prince?" Omekagu's brother asked. "Sing in your heart as you blow a tune into the flute, and what you have requested will be granted by the gods." The handsome man smiled, a smile that said it all, then he vanished. Back at the palace, seeing that the elders would not adhere to his wish, the king decided to take matters into his hands. He sent for his highest ranked guard and servant and instructed them to clad Omekagu in the finest attire and jewelry that he owned. Then, with the guard's protection, they would place Omekagu on the king's horse and proclaim him the rightful heir to the throne. Not having a say in the matter, the servants and guards did as they had been instructed. Omekagu was presented to the villagers as their rightful heir. It was a spectacle. The villagers were in shock, but they were also intrigued by the spectacle. They sent words around so that others could witness what they had witnessed, and as the words went around, they got to Omekagu's brother, who had just returned from his quest. On hearing what the king had done, he was overcome with anger. The king had taken that which belonged to him and given it to the son he loved, so he would take that which the king loved. He took out his flute and blew into it. "Opiaimu fogbolum Omekagu, fogbolum Omekagu. My horn, please, blow Omekagu to death. Omekaguli Jimuo, Omekaguli Idmuo. Omekagu ate the yam of the spirit, Omekagu ate the cocoa yam of the spirit. Obu enai fogbolum Omekagu, fogbolum Omekagu. If you blow Omekagu to death, blow Omekagu to death. Ka emwelu ebony go ieke. So I will sacrifice a ram to clap for you. Obu no I fogbolum Omekagu, fogbolum Omekagu. If you blow Omekagu to death, blow Omekagu to death. Ka emwelu ebony go ieke. So I will sacrifice a ram to clap for you. Mono gia jide ogu, jide ofo, mono gia jide ogu, jidekwe ofo. But hold justice and fairness when you do this. Oh ho ho oh ho oh ho. Oh ho ho oh ho oh ho. Obu and I Folktale Omekagu, Folktale Omekagu. If you blow Omekagu to death, blow Omekagu to death. Ka emwelu ebony go ieke. So I will sacrifice a ram to clap for you. Obu no I Folktale Omekagu, Folktale Omekagu. If you blow Omekagu to death, blow Omekagu to death. Ka emwelu ebony go ieke. So I will sacrifice a ram to clap for you. Mono gia jide ogu, jide ofo, mono gia jide ogu, jidekwe ofo. But hold justice and fairness when you do this. Oh ho ho oh ho oh ho. Oh ho ho oh ho oh ho. Omekagu felt uncomfortable with the attention. He never understood why his father despised his elder brother, and now was ensuring that he and his brother would forever be enemies. He kept a straight face, unsure of how to react until, to his relief, the discomfort ended. He slumped. The guard rushed to catch him before he would hit the group. He was relieved that he caught him, but his relief quickly turned to panic. Omekagu was dead. The villagers went into a frenzy. Omekagu had slumped and died while claiming his brother's throne. Word spread around, and before the head guard would have arrived at the palace with the dead child, the king and queen heard the news. They broke down and cried. The queen blamed the king for provoking the gods, and the king blamed his first wife for cursing him and vowed that he would rather have no heir than pass the throne to her son. As they mourned their dead son, the dibia arrived with the elders. When they saw the dead little boy, they shook their heads in pity. A child will suffer for the foolishness of his father. Elder one said. Please, please, bring back my son. The king begged the dibia. The dibia sat on the floor and threw his offer. As they landed, he shook his head and then looked up at the king. You have brought this upon Omekagu. Me, how? The king asked. I only gave him what was mine. No, the throne does not belong to you, it belongs to the gods. They decided who would sit upon it, and decided that it should be passed to the first son. The dibia said. But you have seized what belongs to the gods as yours, and given it to the one you loved. You have stolen the rights of your first son and handed it to your second son. And now your second son has paid the price. Please, what can we do? Please, I just need my son back. The queen cried. You also partook in your husband's foolishness, you cheered at his wickedness. The dibia said. This is as much your punishment as it is his. Please, I'll do anything. The queen begged. He is my only child. You must send for your first son, only he can ask the gods to revive Omekagu. What do you mean only my first son? The king asked / The gods have placed all that you treasure in his hands, including your life. The dibia said. As they spoke, Omekagu's brother walked in. There was something different about him. He seemed more king-like than the king ever was, and for the first time in a long time, the king's first wife entered the palace behind her son. You murderer! The king lunged at his first son. He could not handle the river of hatred that swelled in him once he saw his first son and his first wife. You have killed my... Omekagu's brother shoved him aside and walked towards the elders. But the king came at him again. I will not disrespect my elders by beating the man who birthed me in their presence. He said, and shoved the king aside again. The elders rushed to hold the king back and urge him to calm down. Dibia. Omekagu's brother greeted. Elder. Once the kind had become calmer, Omekagu's brother walked towards Omekagu. Omekagu was always a good boy. Respectful, he cheered me up on some of my worst days. And yet I have killed him. Everybody but the dibia was shocked. I knew it. The king shouted. Omekagu's brother looked at their father and laughed. You know, I've always wanted your approval. But today, as I stare at you, I realize that not only will I never get it, but I do not need it. The king scoffed. The queen wanted to beg him, but the words would not leave her mouth. You are incapable of remorse, nor accountability, and you think you are invincible. He continued. I thought killing Omekagu would make you reflect on what you have done, and realize your folly, but it didn't. And today I realized why you hate me so much. I am a reminder of the first consequence you received for your wickedness. The first wife's eyes widened. You raped my mother and was forced to marry her by the gods, and so you hated her, and the child she bore. He said. Then took out the flute. This is a flute given to me by the gods. With it, I can demand justice from the gods. With it, I killed Omekagu. With it, I will revive him, and with it, if you refuse to hand over the throne to me, I will demand justice from the gods. And I will reclaim my name, Nkem. Omekagu's brother put the flute in his mouth and blew into it again. Opim futilum Omekagu, futulu Omekagu. My horn, please, bring back Omekagu. Omekaguli ji muo, Omekaguli id muo. Omekagu ate the yam of the spirit, Omekagu ate the cocoa yam of the spirit. Obu and I futulum Omekagu, futulum Omekagu. If you bring Omekagu back, bring back Omekagu. But hold justice and fairness when you do this. Ka emwelu ebony go ieke. Once he was done playing, and to everyone's surprise, Omekagu rose up, unaware of the troubles around him. His mother rushed to hug him. Thank you, she cried. Now, father, will you do the right thing? Omekagu's brother asked. The king stared in disbelief at the living Omekagu, then at the flute. No, he would not let his first son win. He ran forward and grabbed the flute from him, and before his first son could retrieve it, he blew into it. You think you can threaten me with this flute? The king laughed. I have it now, I will be king forever. Just then lightning struck the palace, and to everybody's dismay, the king began to disrobe. First, he respectfully placed the flute on the floor, and then his crown, and then his other clothing followed. He began to sing an unknown song as he walked out of the palace. Legend has it that the spirit of the king has been walking and singing till this very day, and sometimes when a person's wickedness has become unredeemable, the gods afflict them with the king's spirit. After the commotion had settled, Nkem was crowned king. At first, he made his mother queen in order to make up for the years she had suffered, but when he got married, his wife became queen, and he placed his mother in his council.